believe we have a lot of questions from the floor. Later on, we'll do that. So the creating the sustainable model and also the future proving vision. This is why we are here. So for next panel session, I will hand over to Tom Brand, our senior director WBA for marketing and industry. So Tom, please.
We're missing for a bit.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I think this is an important panel because when we talk about sustainability and future proofing, there's a lot of angles that have been discussed over the course of the day, and there's a revolving theme: public-private partnerships, and how do you evolve that. So, I think we've got a good session in front of us. But before we start, I'd like to do a quick introduction. So, first of all, to Kojo Boache. Was that great?
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much. Deputy Director of the Alliance for Affordable Internet. James Noakes, Councillor and Mayoral Lead for Energy and Smart Cities in Liverpool. And welcome back, PJ.
Yeah.
So maybe, Coach, just starting with you, just a quick introduction on who you are, what the Alliance of Affordable Internet is, etc.
Yeah, super quick introduction. First and foremost, thank you for the invite. I'm really pleased to be here in Liverpool, largely because my favourite football team is the Mighty Reds, so it's great to come here. Super quick introduction. The Alliance for Affordable Internet is a programme or initiative underneath the Web Foundation, which is Sir Tim Berners-Lee's foundation, which seeks to ensure that the web is, as he wished it to be, a force for good, a public good that everyone has access to, and we can really leverage the inherent benefits of the web for development. Now, the Alliance for Affordable Internet is the world's largest alliance of stakeholders who wish to ensure that everybody who wishes to use the internet can afford to do so. And currently, we know that around 57% of people are not online. And one of the fundamental reasons for that, the crux of the matter, is that most people cannot afford it, despite being within range of networks, etc. We work in a number of ways. First and foremost through advocacy like this, and I appreciate those of you who have stayed late to listen to all of us. We do a range of research, doing case studies and a quite groundbreaking report, which is called the Affordability Report, which we do annually, looking at 51 developing countries, so comparing apples with apples rather than, in some cases, as some reports do, apples with oranges or bananas. And then we work in countries. So we work in countries where the challenges of affordability and access are most acute, and we work with all of the stakeholders in those countries, and often for the first time creating dialogue between stakeholders who sometimes have never spoken, so between government, private sector, civil society and academia, to identify the key challenges, but also what the solutions are to those challenges.
Okay, thanks. James, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah. I'm James Noakes. So I'm a city councillor here in Liverpool, and I saw, when I first saw you, I could see you were an intelligent man supporting Liverpool. This is my team as well. You will have, some of you have been here when Mayor Anderson welcomed you to Liverpool this morning. I do hope that you've been enjoying the day. I want you to hear you enjoy the city. I am city councillor on the city council. I lead on energy and smart city issues for the mayor. And once I figure out what they are, I'll let you know. The mayor is quite ambitious for the city and for the city region, and we recognised around about 18 months or so ago that to a certain degree, when it came to the digital agenda, when it came to how do we change services, but also how do we support a modern city, and how do we take Liverpool forward into the future, that we needed to have a bit of better focus on both of those two areas. My personal background is as an environmental and energy consultant, so I was sure I was just happened to be passing the room and he grabbed hold of me and said, "This is your bag now." But around the smart city agenda, because as Joe the Mayor, as I say, he recognised that we needed some kind of leadership on it, and it wasn't just a case of it's very easy as a city council to think, well, I've given that to an officer of the council and therefore we're sorted and everything will follow from that. The idea behind appointing someone like me was that we could demonstrate both externally and internally that we have some political clout behind it, and I hopefully that's what I'm helping deliver.
Thank you. Vijay? For those who were not there in the morning.
Thank you for staying late. I'm Vijay Sameta. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of San Jose for, I think, roughly 3 more weeks. And after that, just going to private consulting to look at smart cities and what are the preconditions that cities can do to make themselves more attractive to people like Deutsche Telekom. A lot of what you said resonated with me because as I think about a smart city, I think of the immediate and then midterm and long-term things for future-proofing a city as much as you can do that. And the immediate thing I tell every city is get over the fact the private sector needs to make money. When we look at mass urbanization, the challenges that cities face from an infrastructure perspective is so immense that they're not going to be able to tackle it alone, which means that we're going to need, and I think public-private partnership is an interesting term because it always gets used as, please give me something for free, and that's not sustainable. And so the immediate thing I think of is just getting into a relationship, a partnership, a business model that is sustainable both for the city and the private sector. And so I realize this is the intro, so I won't take all the time.
Could be the closing words already.
Yeah.
Closing
We're done.
The conclusion is, right. But that's a great point to start off, Vijay, because I heard Michael say in his presentation the terminology operator-controlled ecosystem, right? Which, in your case, I fully understand, right? So I'm wondering, and start with James first and then to Vijay, how do you vision, because obviously that, like Vijay said, the public-private partnership is not giving me everything for free, right? And funding, as Michael said, is a completely very important issue. So how do you see that the balance in a partnership when it comes to that funding aspect?
For those of you who are students of local politics, I admit there'll be very few of you in the room. Here in the UK, you'll know we've had pretty volatile history when it comes to Labour politics and the relationship between politics, the public sector, and the private sector. And I like to think, certainly under Mayor Anderson, we want to forge a very different relationship because we recognise that. Quite aside from the kind of push that we're getting, so Liverpool has seen a 58% reduction in its funding from government between 2010 and this year. We are, it's fair to say, still struggling to be able to finance the provision of statutory services. So quite aside from that push element, there is a pull element, and that is the public out there wants to see things delivered very differently. And I think Jamie from Dublin highlighted the fact that the skills just don't exist a lot of the time in the public sector. We do a lot of very good things in the public sector, but we also think we do a lot of things better than we actually do. If I'm not beginning to sound a bit Donald Rumsfeld there. We've got to recognise the role that we can play, and so here in Liverpool, one of the things that we're beginning to recognise is that yes, we do have a good role to play in enabling others to use the city and to deliver services as well. And I'll give you one example. So we have Sensor City here in Liverpool, which is a partnership between the two universities, and that is how do you develop the next generation of sensors in a whole array of environments. And one of the things that we're working with them on is a memorandum of understanding so that they can then use those sensors within the city. So whether that's on street, but actually for us more importantly within the services that we deliver, so that out of that we get a very different way of being able to deliver services and support the city, but they get the benefit of being able to have almost a living laboratory here. And I think those kind of relationships are increasingly more important than those very transactional relationships that we've had before where we pay for a service. I mean, even the private sector, certainly some of the large corporates are now turning around to us and saying, that they find it difficult to have those big contracts because you're tied in for all those huge amount of clauses, and it's very difficult to do things differently and better because they'd like to learn at the same time. So yeah, a very different relationship has been having to build up.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, as I think of, the context of mass urbanization, and, certainly I think we as government call them citizens and businesses and residents, and, the private sector calls them customers. It turns out they're the same people. And the more we recognize that value in that statement, it really starts to forge a different type of public-private partnership. And what I mean by that is people don't have a bad experience with one particular telecom provider and leave it alone. What we get is, in the capital of Silicon Valley, how can I have such poor connectivity in San Jose? And so when we really start to shift our mindset around that and think about, how do we have just as mass urbanization happening with people, it's happening with mobile devices, only faster, right? So people are used to, I remember when it was 1.3 mobile devices. I don't know how you get 0.3, but 1.3 mobile devices. Now we're closer to 3 mobile devices in tech-heavy convention centers. So that means that one person has the opportunity to have 3 bad experiences. And so we're not going to tackle that alone. And geography is an important enabler as we think about going to small cells, from macro to small cells, and getting more dense with those networks. That there's an opportunity there where the geography in a city becomes a very valuable asset by which to help accomplish other urban goals. And so whether it's, I'm going to deploy a smart parking solution, which you don't make, but you resell, but also co-locate a small cell and take that platform, and the word platform is almost as overused as smart city, big data, cloud, but literally the urban environment becoming a platform by which we may not break down the silos within city government as easily. We can do it in the urban infrastructure and really start creating a sustainable business model. And so that's 2 cents on that.
Michael, comment?
Well, I think I said already a lot of that, and I think you also mentioned a lot of very important points, especially if you consider a small cell, for example. Because if you see devices will grow, and there will be more and more of this kind of need for small cells. It's, I think, for us very important to find ways how to roll out a network in a way that it's cost efficient, because simply by reducing cost by 90% is not enough to actually have the small cells we need to offer a very good quality service all around. It's not enough. We need actually new business models how we can utilize the same spot in different ways. And there, for example, really the smart lighting, the sensors, the cameras, all these things come up. Not for really, we will not put them up, but we will somehow invite an ecosystem to really have this put on this kind of small cell places and reducing our costs simply, so we can actually provide that. On the other hand, if we are doing this already, and I think one joke we had once with Dutch Telecom, what we are very good in is creating complexity and then managing it. And it's, I think, this ecosystem of smart cities is very complex. And that's really where we being a trusted partner of cities, maybe not so much of the customers if we have a bad connection, but cities trust us in a way, or at least some of the cities, that we can somehow make a partnership and really trying to create a situation where we can get a piece of the cake. I mean, controlling it would be interesting, but for sure it was just a joke in that way. And then creating a really situation where we can add value for the different kind of partners in that.
Yeah. So, also one of the points was cost-benefit analysis, right? So how do you define the cost? How do you define the benefit for the citizen and the city, right? So if I just focus on the benefit for the citizen, and I look at it from an affordability point of view, right? So I know you've done tons of research. We did some research recently for World Wi-Fi Day, and we looked at what the correlation was between adoption of broadband versus the affordability. And it's staggering, right? And so I was wondering, in what's happening in the Alliance right now, what would be your advice, if you can call it like that, or your findings on creating an affordable environment where the citizen has affordable access, but does that at the same time create a situation where there's also more affordable access for the city services? So there's kind of two parts to the question. So let's maybe start with the citizen aspect first. So what is your experience in creating that affordability in terms of broadband access or internet access?
I guess our experience is, I guess one of the things I realize a lot is that there's a huge amount of information and data and examples, as we've heard here today, on how you create smart cities in this case, but affordable access. And our feeling is that there are policy and regulatory changes in some cases, wholesale changes in others, that governments can make alongside all the other stakeholders that I've spoken about in order to kind of change the cost factors. So one of the questions I believed I heard was, how do we create this dynamic for investment where we have an understanding of how much government needs to put in if necessary and how much the private sector needs to put in. And I'll pull an example from some of the developing countries we work in. So we have huge swathes of this country, or of some of these countries, which have no access whatsoever. And private sector players, not Deutsche Telekom, but others, will say there's no point in going to invest there because these are very small rural communities, low ARPUs. I'm not going to get my return on investment. And what we found in some of these countries is that by government undertaking an access gap study, which is a regulatory, if you want to call it that, but a regulatory solution or action that government can take, they can identify areas where operators might find profit, or where they can partner with operators to provide a service in order to create a sustainable market. And that's just one example of the policy and regulatory actions that governments can take. We would put first, creating a broadband plan, having a vision, ensuring that you have a champion there, more than a champion. If it's at presidential level, great, but ministerial level. We'd also add a number of other things, having good infrastructure sharing between operators, having good spectrum management. So there's a range of policy and regulatory actions, good practices that governments can follow in order to create that, to change cost structures for the private sector and therefore create affordability. The knock-on of that is the things that we've heard many, many times about the benefits of internet access, and we've heard about some of those this morning, about the impact it can have on GDP and national growth, etc. But at the very nuclear level or granular level is giving people that connectivity can change lives. I mean, there's so many stories of how just being connected to family members, being connected to emergency services, being connected to educational content and health content can have a revolutionary impact on people's lives, especially those whom we work with, which are the very poorest of the poor.
Okay. I was going to say, in terms of making it the benefits for people, there's a woman called Mara Balestrini. I always remember something she said at a conference was, I don't want my coffee maker to tweet, I want it to make better coffee. And we're very good sometimes at coming up with all of these very different, dare I say, blingy type things, hoping that people are really, that's what they're really after. We haven't spent enough time speaking to people out there. I wrote a piece a few weeks back actually called Smart, which the title was "Smart Cities Are Lame." Yeah. Because we've spent a huge amount of time. I was getting quite frustrated at this idea. We spent a huge amount of time focusing on some of the smaller things when actually the bigger things were. So, for instance, highways and transport is 2% of our budget in this city, and seems to be a huge focus of what people want to talk about. Whereas children and adult social services is 52% of our budget. So where do you think the city is going to be concentrating an awful lot on? We need to look at that. I mean, no offence to anyone who makes a parking sensor, but just being able to park a couple of minutes quicker is not the same as kind of discovering penicillin and things like that. It's not in a sense tackling some of the big issues that we face, and some of the issues that when we speak to the general public, that's really what they want to see a change on. So going back and actually speaking to people I've got no. I'm not saying people don't want to be able to park decently or anything in this city or anything. However, we just sometimes start from the wrong place. We've found a solution and we're looking around for a problem. And really, we should be going back and speaking to people about what they really want. And then it becomes, well, it clearly will be much more relevant, and you'll have a better use case at the end of it.
Can I just say, it's not just a better use case. It's a better use case and then also a better business case. So I have to say, I questioned why I was coming to Liverpool, despite my love of the city, because this subject matter is slightly further down the line than where we are with some of the work that we do, which is basically to connect those that are unconnected. And I know there are countries like Rwanda and a number of other countries that are trying to create these smart cities, but there's a number of people out there, high-profile people, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, who says IoT, smart cities is way down the line for some of the challenges we're facing. But I've been encouraged listening here today about how most of the tech providers here have spoken about the need to have this conversation, the need to speak to people. Some people said informally. In some cases, I prefer formally because I think that really helps you, monitor and evaluate who you're speaking to, what the impact was at the end. But I've been really encouraged by the fact that the tech providers understand they're not going to get anywhere unless you speak to people about the kind of services they want and how they want to interact with them.
Maybe just a quick note on that, because I fully agree with you. I mean, probably a lightning and a parking will not, be on the highest agenda of the citizens. On the other hand, I think it's very important for the city to understand how can they save money and generate additional revenues to create a maneuver space to tackle other things which don't have a business case. I mean, I talk it in a way. So, and that's why we said, okay, this is really something, if we help you, also interesting for us because there's a lot of money involved, but that, you create an environment that you have better budgets, let's say it like that, and then you're open to a lot of new solutions, which we might also somehow be part of it.
Yeah.
So not just going for the quick dollar or the quick euro, pound, but really having a maneuver space. And that's what I'm trying to say is a common integrated strategy, that you have to sit together with the couple of people who are involved, who can make decisions, make a mid to long-term plan, and implement it. And trying to also finance it, because that's the greatest thing.
So Michael, coming back to your examples, right? So you mentioned, for instance, the biking concept. Was that now driven by the city, or was that driven by a citizen?
That's the smartest thing we've done.
Citizen requirement, as it were.
You want to have the honest story or the diplomatic?
The politically correct story.
Honest, always honest.
No, it was very simple, because I think the reason why we had this project was simply the first point on one of my slides, win the elections, was really that some mayor said, okay, this is what I want because this is something I can sell to my citizens. However, we try to make a business model out of it, and I think at the end of the day, yes, it's driving the mayor's idea to win elections, but on the other hand, you could really bring things together, and at the end you have public biking is usually a negative business. But since we try to develop these business models where you have advertisement involved and those things, at the end, a crucial part for extending this intelligent transportation solution, but also to create data which you can use for other purposes. And at the end, it was a success, even though it was driven purely by the wish of the mayor to really have these things implement before the local elections. And it was very tricky, and he was very angry with us if he didn't hit all the timelines. So we opened it 3 times.
It's probably the. I say this. Not something that was under my responsibility. It's probably the smartest thing that we've done in this city. Was our city bike scheme, which you're all welcome to use if you wish. In part because it just made people think of how you use the city very differently. It's probably fair to say, if you saw Joe this morning, he's not the biggest cyclist. Well, you could take that 1-2 ways. But I should collect my P45 on the way out. It's probably fair to say that he's not the greatest cyclist. However, he recognised that there's this need to look at how we connect people differently. And the city bike scheme, probably the kind of one of the proudest moments was along the promenade, which stretches right along the river, seeing a group of teenagers. There was about 8 of them, all with a city bike, and kind of thinking that would not have happened. That day out that collection unless we provided some of that infrastructure, and that's a real lesson for a lot of other things that we do, whether it's a different type of technology from the bike.
Yeah. PJ?
Yeah, there's this term in the Valley called the strategy tax, or the innovator's dilemma. And that is, you have to cannibalize your old business model in order to create new, more profitable business models. You got to create something new, the iPhone 7, 8, 9, right? And when I think about that in cities, we've kind of covered my first strategy, right? Private sector's got to make money. The second is, what can we learn, or what can cities learn from technology? Voice over IP is not a big deal these days. Everybody does it, right? Now we're on to voice over Wi-Fi, and now we're looking beyond that. So, okay. So we've seen convergence in networks. So now the middle strategy, I'll say the walk strategy, if that's the crawl strategy I described earlier, is hyperconvergence in cities, right? So where are we layering these applications on top of themselves such that the streetlight doesn't just get converted to LED. It doesn't just get converted to a small cell. It also has a electric vehicle charging on it. It has the ability to look at smart parking, right? So we're taking a single city asset and we're just converging everything we can onto it. Why does it have to be one or two of those? Why can't it be all of those? I think that's a little challenging for where the state of the industry is today, because it takes a lot of players. It's a big investment. But back to my point, private sector's got to make money. But then I think of the long term, as cities start to really collaborate with private sector over the long term, we're going to cannibalize that business model, and that is, the city will open its infrastructure. We're talking about conduits and fiber and right-of-way access to the point where suddenly we're no longer driving to work. Think about VR and AR coming into homes where it really is now this fundamental impact on urban design. We don't have a garage at our home and a parking space at work. We don't have to transit across the city in order to get to work. And I think for the first time in history, we're seeing where technology is cutting across all segments of the way cities deliver service, and now influencing urban design and urban planning. And I think that's what I think the ultimate, innovation tax or innovator's dilemma is for cities today, is to act quickly in the short term, but think long term about how commercial buildings either don't exist or don't have parking spaces anymore. Yeah. And the autonomous vehicle is just the middle place in that. So
I come back to that. I've got it. Chris has got a question over there, but I'll come back to. I've got a question for you there, PJ, as well. Chris.
Thanks, Tom. I've got a statement or a reflection which I'll try and turn into a question for the panel. And I'm reflecting on my years in the Wi-Fi business for quite some time, and during that 10, 12 years, I've wrestled with the fact that with most products, you'd make a product that cost you £100, euros, dollars, and you try and sell it for £120. You try and make a profit. With Wi-Fi, it seems to be the other way around. It costs 100, and you get to sell it for 20, and then you rush around thinking creatively, because for some reason, to your agenda there, for some reason that product is deemed to be free, and of course there is a real cost, but it's free to the user, or people expect it to be free. So I've spent most of my time in the last 12 years thinking of alternative business models that would allow me to top up that 20 to certainly 100, and please a bit more than 100, otherwise my CFO will be giving me the hook. And oftentimes, in fact always, there's never one 80 or 100 to get me back to the 120. I've got a stack of value propositions or revenue streams, some of which are solid, some of which might happen, and some of which are just a wink and a prayer. I think I'm still here. I'm still just talking. So that's my reflection, and my question is, in this sort of thing, is to be able to get to that point where private industry, operators, technology people right, get to that profit, we're all going to have to work a bit more, think a bit more creatively, more collaboratively, and somehow my reflection for the cities, my question for you is, do you think the cities and industry are yet ready to think across departments in the city, across different types of services? Because often the cost will be here, but the benefit will be found there. You know, the cost will be in the lamp lighting poles, but the benefit will be found in transport or telecare. And the value will be seen by some other party that may be either in or outside of the council. So, kind of a question.
James, you want to start?
Yeah, I fully get your dilemma. One of a couple of different things. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's still an awful lot of change that needs to be made, certainly in local authorities, to get them to realise that the world is changing and they need to think of different ways of doing things. And some of that is going to be through natural churn. Some of that's going to be because, you know, the old duffers are going to die, or they're going to retire, or what have you. And I'll probably include myself in that pretty soon. And so, you know, naturally people will think very different ways. When I speak to our digital and creative community here in the city about some of these issues, their first response isn't what money can you give us, like it probably would have been 5-10 years ago. They're thinking of things like Kickstarter. They're thinking of how can you approach other investors, and they also recognise that, you know, the freemium model is something that comes quite naturally to them, and that people are altruistic. You know, people will pay for some, people will give funding towards something, or they will engage with something that to a certain degree seems altruistic when they've got a kind of very free model elsewhere. You know, TripAdvisor is a great example of that. There's absolutely no reason why you should go on there and tell everyone that it was a great hotel. And you can think of many reasons why you'd tell them it was an awful one. I think there's certainly a generational shift. The caveat to that is I wouldn't just say that I wouldn't lump everyone together and say that no one recognises that how we fund things and how we finance things has to change. Here in the city, we're beginning to move towards an invest to earn model. So we will invest the city's finances in, because we're revenue poor and capital rich to a certain degree in local government in the UK. So we will invest in. For instance, we bought the Cunard building, which we're situated on the front. That's where we have our offices now, and we will be taking a profit out of that because of how we use the building. We actually bought Everton FC's training ground for exactly the same purposes, not just because Joe was an Everton fan. So we're already having to think outside the box. Sometimes it's needs must, but there's definitely a generational push that says those old ways of doing it, yeah, we get that they don't quite work for you, but we've got lots of different ways that we want to look at it.
Yeah, I'd almost exactly echo that. I mean, if you think about millennials, they actually don't want to drive, right? And so how do city leaders, whether before they're dead or retire, how do they answer those questions, right? And I think it's the reason why Uber is so successful with millennials. It's because I don't want to drive. And when I was a kid, if my choices were get a driver's license or be embarrassed by my parents driving me everywhere. I mean, those were my two choices, because the public transportation network in, the western half of the United States isn't that great. It's seen as a low-income way to move about the city, but all of that has changed now. Millennials don't want to drive. I can essentially on demand call a private driver to take me from point to point. I don't have to know how the public transportation network works. So I think the supply and demand has started to level out in cities in terms of the way behavior occurs and the way it's fulfilled. And I think at the end of the day, assuming they can afford it, which is another topic, but people recognize and pay for value. And I think the more value you deliver over that, your 20% Wi-Fi recoup, that 80%, the more value you can deliver over that in meaningful ways, and it's a grind. It's definitely a grind. but the more value, I think people recognize and pay for value, and I would venture to say they would pay a premium for value. So.
I'm not sure I heard the question correctly, because I understood the question to be, if the health department makes an investment and doesn't actually see the benefit, but education sees the benefit, is that are we seeing that kind of thinking where the health department's happy to put in 100 million? Your CFO would like that, knowing that it may see some benefit, but the real benefit's going to be felt by the education department. Was that right? Did I hear your question?
Well, there's actually two converged questions. One is, well, the question is, how open is local government? How open is the industry to a double, triple, third, fourth-sided business model where the benefit may be, the cost may be seen someplace, but the benefit will come somewhere else? And how do we create a mechanism so that those two things are transferred to encourage the industry to deploy things which may end up looking to the user, the citizen, as free, or something that the council or somebody's delivered for free, but has actually been sponsored in some way, or there's this converged benefit, or it's just a question of how open do we think we all are to creatively look at this challenge from a commercial point of view.
I personally think governments, whether by choice or it has to be open to it. We've heard about the cuts that Liverpool City Council has suffered since 2010, 58%, something they say. Unbelievable. So government has to be open to that. The one thing I question, and this is something I struggle with in the countries that we work in, is who is going to champion that? Who's going to have that understanding that this kind of thinking needs to take place? And then who's going to push that through? Who's going to make sure that the four sides are all in line? And if they're not in line, who's going to drag them into line to ensure that happens? And that's where I'm not sure that's actually happening. I came a little bit late, but I saw a presentation in which this idea of silos still existing, and it was either the great presentation from New York or wherever else, and they'd broken down these silos, and whether that was a central team in the work that we do, a one-stop shop with a champion in there who understands the issues, who understands how to talk to the private sector, and is therefore responsible, has to be, for breaking down those silos and making sure that understanding's there and dragging it through. I think that's what's necessary. And each and every council in the UK and each and every government in the countries we work in has to have that person or has to have that department.
So I think, see the same thing. I mean, just silo thinking, just two thoughts on this. The first, it's very similar to what we experience in a big company like Deutsche Telekom, what you also know from BTS, I'm sure. That how to break those silos.
Never dysfunctional.
Definitely, you're different.
Not the new BT.
But that's also something, and that's the second, I mean, how you can solve it is about incentives. And just a little story that with this energy savings, it was really interesting. We went to, I think, somewhere, a city in Hungary, and they said, you're not interested in saving energy because it's paid by the central government. If we give it back, we don't get anything in return. So why the hell should we do that? And this thinking is completely absurd, but that's really how it works usually. And where you have to manage the incentive system in a proper way. And the last point to basically how to break the silos, it's really what I also mentioned before, that you have to have I think somebody who is really going across all this kind of different areas. And this person has to be enabled from the highest level to really ask nasty questions and execute them. And I think that's really a crucial thing.
Can I quickly just add, in the UK, it strikes me, whatever your politics, it strikes me that now is the time for that kind of thinking to be happening. Sorry, Joe. As budgets have evolved and people are given more responsibility, we heard about councils being given responsibility on health budgets, etc. It seems that there's a cash strapped and tight, but the opportunity and the reason for having that kind of thinking and that kind of championing is therefore really, really apparent in the UK. I'm not quite sure about Hungary, but
we don't, as local authorities don't exist to make a profit. So I mean, we exist to deliver the services and to support the city. So in many ways, it's completely wrong that one department should be concerned that the benefit is realised elsewhere. Yeah. And I think that's actually part of the shift of which the UK is fairly late in coming to, of moving away from city leaders and even some committees making decisions and having mayors, and then why we're having those metro mayors, because there's a recognition that if we're going to compete, certainly globally, Liverpool's 470,000 people. It feels like in parts of China that's one street. When we compare the size of cities, and and we've got to work on a bigger level. So when we look at the city region level, 1.5 million people begins to kind of stand out a little bit more. And the same goes for other parts of the UK. And the only way you can begin to smack down those even bigger silos between different areas by having that mayoral model. It's about the only way that we've figured out that we can do. That sometimes you need someone who can be as consensus as you like, but actually sometimes needs to be a bull in the china shop.
Bullet pulpit. Chris, you asked a very interesting question, and I would say, I think the role, depending on a city-by-city basis, is I don't think those business models, I think you need a strong champion to recognize those various multi-dimensional models. But approaching a city with those models, it sounds like you guys are doing that, is good. And let the city find the money to do it. Because, we talk a lot in San Jose about free Wi-Fi, but it's underpinned by things like we compete with private parking lots in downtown. So we own the right-of-way. We have large signs that point you to only our parking garages, right? But don't make no mistake. City is a business. We're in some definite social good, but we compete with a lot of private parking lots. And let me tell you, when you own the right of way and there's a big LED sign telling you how many free spaces in real time to our parking lot, we're lowering our operating expenses. We're generating more revenue from parking garages, all by Wi-Fi. So we focus a lot on free Wi-Fi, but that's really just the tip you see above the waterline. And we talked a lot about smart cities, and procurement is definitely difficult. So my comment to the vendor community is, the smartest thing you can do in trying to work with a smart city is ask a dumb question. Why do you do it that way?
It can also, I'm quite a fan of telling people to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, which can get an awful lot of people into trouble, I fully accept, but sometimes that's the only way. Because there are plenty of businesses, and I know them as well, there's plenty of businesses out there, even in this city, who they're merrily going ahead and doing stuff that really they should be telling us about. So because they're there to disrupt.
Say sorry after, definitely.
Okay. Shrikant? And then Ross?
Yeah, the question, I think the topic is about future-proofing the vision, so maybe around that context, I have a question. We talked a lot about the public-private partnership and how the cities need to work with public-private partners, and there was a talk about innovation labs of all kind that people are trying to use startups and innovators. So the question is, that's a very complex relationship, and that also inevitably means you're not in charge of your destiny as a city. So while you want to future-proof your vision, how do you manage such a complex relationship and yet retain your vision?
Well, sure. Let me take a stab at that. And I think what's different than business models of the past is, cities have gone through this evolution, and free Wi-Fi, to Chris's point, would be my perfect example. In the United States, we had, lots of free Wi-Fi offers. They rolled in, and I'm thinking of the same geography I currently run a Wi-Fi network in. 2 backhaul locations, everything else was mesh, all advertised supported, and people were going to pay up in order to get a better experience. That never materialized. It kind of boomed and busted, and who gets the black eye? The elected official, or the IT director. But as we moved kind of past that, then we moved to, well, it's just got to be free. And as I think that there's still a balance a city can strike in those deals, and incentives are a very important part of that. It's like anything else in life. If you're not incentivized to do it, you're going to do a bad job if you do the job at all. And so I think the city can still control their destiny from a performance requirements. I don't want to call them specifications because I think cities should be more outcome-based, but certainly control the quality while not being so prescriptive in exactly the way it gets done. I think we've had this discussion with many cities around Wi-Fi RFPs. It's got to be exactly this fast and exactly like this, and it's actually an inhibitor to people wanting to take that very first step. In doing a citywide Wi-Fi deployment, it turns out that first AP has to get hung. It has to get hung. And if you create so many barriers, then I think that inhibits innovation. And I think the concept of just saying, here's our performance target, and just having a very incentivized and accountable relationship is a good way to do that.
Maybe also, I think to manage the complexity is it's somehow important also to focus on what you can really do as a city and what you should not do. I mean, also with the big companies all around the world, it's the outsourcing point is a very important thing as well. That why do you have this CIOs everywhere? We have a huge organization.
Are you trying to get rid of me?
You need a small organization managing the vendors, but you don't need a huge organization doing the whole thing. And you should really rather offer in an open way, okay, this is the issue, solve it to me, and don't nail it down in many details. And then let the vendors do this kind of things. And I think that will also create a lot of less complexity. Plus the second point, what I think cities don't really use is the data. They have so many data, and they don't know what to do with it, because people in the cities, it's new for them. It's not what is their core business. So get somebody in, get an idea, maybe also on a country basis with the support of the central government, to get an idea, a strategy, get consultants involved in a way, how can we use this data in a way to create actually maneuver space for other solutions.
I think there's I've really enjoyed myself today, largely because usually I go and speak and I'm the one pouring out knowledge, and this is a very different environment, and I've learned a hell of a lot. But thinking about this question about how to future-proof, first of all, I thought there's no way I can answer that, because first of all, I'd be much richer than I am if I knew it. I probably wouldn't be here if I knew the answer to how to future-proof it. But there are, I think, a number of things we can put in place. The connectivity that we've spoken about today is essential for our constituents, but also all of those in the smart cities that you guys are trying to create. I think from what I've heard today as well, the type of partnerships that you develop, because I've heard a lot today about private sector giving up on government after the things go wrong. I think the chap from Dublin spoke about that, but also government getting their procurement and all kinds of things wrong. And I think we're far enough down the line for us to kind of be in a position to learn from what we've learned from what's gone wrong, develop the kind of partnerships that's necessary. And I think that would help us be in a position to have a better execution of the vision rather than future-proof it. And then for us, it's to ensure that all of those people that want to use services that are required to make business models viable and sustainable have access and are online. And that means access in some cases to the devices, but also just to the connectivity, and whether that's free, which is a model that in some places doesn't exist, or whether they have to pay for it. It's just ensuring that they have access. But I'm always shy of trying to talk about the future. When I was coming up here, I looked at my iPhone and I considered how long has the iPhone been around, and I would have said 10 years, a decade at least.
29th of June. Okay.
Yeah, 29th of June.
July.
2007, right?
Yeah.
So it's
2 days after Tony Blair left.
Yeah. So it's not even a decade that we've had the iPhone, and the other variants of it that have come up and revolutionized the kind of the world that we're in. So I'm always wary of trying to talk about things that are too far in the future. And I've done a lot of strategic planning with organisations as well, so I know how visions change.
Yeah, cities are really messy, and they kind of almost have to be, and it's incredibly arrogant of. If I was to sit here and say, well, we're the only ones who drive what happens in the city, and the only people who are responsible are those with the big strategic ideas and the local authorities, or even the mayor, but shush, don't tell him I told you that. There is a lot more going on out there than necessarily is driven just by the local authority. When we were looking at, we put in a bid for the IoT demonstrator that City 5, which you saw before, was successful with, and we were looking at the IoT journey that different people make. Some people will make an IoT journey throughout their day, which is incredibly reliant on the services that the local authority will deliver. Going back to some research I think Surrey did many years ago, which was around about 65% of their spend is spent on 5% of the people. So there's some people who are very reliant on services, and then there's other people who are right at the other end of the scale who, aside from collecting the bins and using the roads, there's pretty much not much else that they directly engage with in terms of services that the city provides. So there's a huge amount of other things going on out there. So part of future-proofing is recognising that it's not just in terms of what the city council itself delivers. And it's also, even if you don't see that and you still need the support of the city council, you don't need to necessarily talk about their services, but you need their support because of you're trying to do something in the city. I'm always reminded of something I was told when I first came into politics, that sometimes leadership is finding out where everyone else is going and walking in front. And never be surprised by the amount of times you'll get the support simply because you're already doing something and it looks like a good idea. But just to finish on that kind of future-proofing stuff, it's something, it's a bit of work that I do with a consultancy that's set up with my friend, which is about this issue, is that more often than not, certainly in government and local government, we're very poor at building into ideas about the future into our policies. So we try and solve the problems of today and hope that that'll last us for years to come. The second thing is we make policy as if it's going to last forever. And we don't then try and figure out what we call it canaries in the coal mine. What are the things that are going to change that really should flag up to you that you need to intervene or you need to change? And then secondly, in order to scale or to replicate, what kind of variables do you need to understand? And I think those three key areas, if you begin to understand them, I think that holds you in good stead to future-proofing whatever you're doing.
Thank you. Ross, you had a question? It's the last question. Where we have to...
So my question was really to Vijay about your statement around, cities need to get over the fact that private companies need to make money. I just wonder, when you say that to cities, how they respond.
Is this because you're going into consultancy?
No, has nothing to do with that. Yes, it has everything to do with that. See all those billions on that slide? The previous. No, the challenge is, and this is, smart cities are interesting. We're trying to mate the technology industry with the industry of cities. One has a gestation period of 2 to 3 years, and one has 20 to 30 years. So we're trying to mate these two things. And the reality is, where that line of where government should stop and the private sector should take over, it is really an interesting one as we try and both tackle mass urbanization. And so while I'm not going to outsource the CIO, maybe in 3 weeks, the reality is there's a lot of governance and, the raw infrastructure things, the preconditions that make a successful city, that's where cities should be focused. So it's that long-term, let's make sure the sewers work, let's make sure the roadways work. But yeah, the core infrastructure stuff. But, the use of data was a great example because how to iterate on those business models, if you've got to make up 80% of your Wi-Fi deployment, you need to iterate very quickly, and that's something that traditionally cities haven't been good at. So how do you bring on those partners? How do you give them some skin in the game? You say, I need to tackle this problem and I want you to invest, and if you can come up with 5 other ways to offset not only your capital investment but make you some money, I think that's great. Because the idea of the city jumping into the iterative process, no offense, we start getting to elected officials' whims on very short terms, and it's just not a good use of public, in my opinion, not a good use of public, taxpayer dollars, because, one of the, I'll say, I said this, and it was unfortunately tweeted out, but I'll own it. The idea that cities are the ultimate startup is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and here's why. When you look at any startup and a venture-backed startup, they expect 90+% of them to fail. Get an elected official to stand up and say, "Dear constituency, I've taken your tax dollars and I have failed 90% of the time." Do you think they're going to be reelected? No. Do you think they're going to drive public value? No. So I would say that's why I stick to this concept that line has got to be defined a little better in smart cities. I think there needs to be a healthy relationship, and government has an obligation to be good stewards of public infrastructure, public dollars, but let the private sector iterate on business models that return not only value to customers but to the community as a whole. So that's my thoughts.
That whole debate between that you discussed there and where that line should be drawn is effectively the economic debate that goes on between the political parties anyway. It's not just a kind of city issue as a whole. Well, that's a whole different conference, I'd suggest. But yeah, there's a definite realisation. I mean, it is up to stronger leaders to be able to turn around to people and say, we are employing these people because of these various different reasons. Because we will always get people coming back to us and saying, you've made the wrong decisions, you've wasted so much money, etc. And we are acutely aware of being re-elected, but it's not being re-elected for re-elected's sake. It's because we want to continue on delivering what the programs that we want to, or we have put in place or want to put in place. However, as I say, it is kind of much stronger leadership to have that discussion with the public about why we've made these decisions. We will get people who, regardless of what we do, will always have a go at us because someone's delivering a service and making some kind of profit out of it. Kind of fully accept that. They don't seem to complain too much about those people then going spending money in the local area or investing elsewhere, etc. And that's kind of part of the wider discussion that we need to have. Sometimes it'll be very difficult if it's an organisation that is adding very little value and is taking that out of the area. But I suppose that comes back down to the politicians themselves and having the correct contracts in place in the first place. But that whole debate, I think people out there are wise to it. The vast majority of people out there work in the private sector. They recognise that that needs to happen. It's just it's up to the politicians themselves to be able to make the case.
Tom, can I make a very quick point on open data? I know, is it Michael?
Yeah.
Michael spoke about open data, and I heard give the data or collect the data would help make us future-proof, and then give the data to consultants. And I wasn't sure if VJ was agreeing with that, but one of the things that we at the Web Foundation would like to see is countries signing up to an open data charter where the data is released, and we've seen this in a number of countries that we work in. Young guys and girls grab that data and are creating helpful, useful, and in some cases, money-generating services out of that data. So probably we can talk about offline. It doesn't always need to be consultants. Making that data open is a great way of moving forward.
Be quick, because otherwise the Googles, Amazons, Apples of this world, they don't need you or the city because they have it already. But it's another story.
But I don't think they call that open data. Yeah. Okay, so it's time to finish this session. So I'd like to thank Michael, Kojo, VJ, James for their participation. And this also wraps up the whole day. This is the first time that we did a full day Connected City Summit within the Wireless Global Congress. I definitely think we will conclude that this can be repeated next time. It was a very, very interesting journey, a very, very long day, very, very hot room. But I think this...
It is the Bangladesh suite.
That's why it was called that way. Okay. So thank you very much. And for those who are staying over for the next 2 days, hope to see you soon there. Thank you.
Thank you.